Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gilda Evans, bringing you the Autism Resource Podcast. This podcast and the ARP website are your one-stop knowledge and resource space for autism and much more. I'm happy to have Kimberly Lavelanet join me as my guest today. Kimberly is a board-certified behavior analyst with over 19 years of experience in applied behavior analysis. She served as a clinical behavior consultant at Harbor Regional Center for 9 years, supporting individuals, families, and providers as part of the psychological and behavior services team. She became a certified UCLA PEERS Provider in 2016, specializing in evidence-based social skills training for adolescents and adults. In 2022, she became an AASECT Certified Sexuality Educator, expanding her experience into sexual health education. In an effort to meet gaps in services, Kimberly founded BEHAVRIUM Health Services in 2023 to promote behavioral and sexual health for every learner and their families. Welcome, Kimberly, and thanks so much for taking the time to join me and discuss the work that you do.
Thank you, Gilda, for having me. You provide such a phenomenal resources for families and for people to just have a place to learn and be able to access information and to hear from so many professionals. So I'm very happy to be here with you today.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I truly appreciate it. So to get us going here, people have presented various views on ABA services. Some people love it. Some people say, no, I'll never, ever do that again. It's really quite a wide variety of opinion. So what is your opinion of where ABA services stand at the present time?
Thank you so much for asking me this. Having been in the field now for just nearly 20 years, ABA has been highly debated in recent years, yet it is the most researched form of therapy for autism and the neurodiverse community. And as you mentioned, people have had very different experiences with ABA. And as a clinician, it is so unfortunate to hear that so many people have had negative experiences. And it is important that as clinicians, we acknowledge the lived experiences of families and participants who partake in these services. My current view is that ABA itself can be a helpful tool in addressing various needs to improve the outcomes in people's lives. And I personally have seen both sides where families have benefited and other situations where the agency, the clinician, or the staff was perhaps not a good match for that family or the individual. I've worked with families where ABA helped their child gain functional communication and reduce unsafe behaviors in a way that truly improved the individual's life. And in those cases, I think the important thing to highlight is that the ABA team was flexible, respected the child's autonomy, and collaborated closely with the family. However, on the other side, I've also supported families who came to me after stopping their ABA services because their prior experience felt rigid, perhaps very compliance driven. Goals were more focused on stopping behaviors rather than helping caregivers understand why challenging routines were happening in the first place. And oftentimes, families have also reported not being comfortable speaking up when they disagree with certain goals or the manner in which staff have responded to behavioral concerns. And in some situations, the individual, the self-advocate themselves, have indicated that their own voices or opinions were not taken into account when services were being created to assist them in the first place. So I think to sum up what my consensus is that ABA should never just be about compliance or making an individual peer, for example, less autistic, as I've heard. It should focus on quality of life, safety, communication, and independence. And I encourage both caregivers and professionals to ask and consider the needs, the desires, and the wants of the person that they support. We all benefit from listening and learning from neurodiverse folks about how ABA has impacted them both positively and negatively. And then only can we truly adapt and improve ABA moving forward. This has really refined my own view of ABA and how I recommend services today.
It sounds like you're talking about a much kinder and gentler approach than has existed in the past, and much more humanistic.
Yeah, I think not just humanistic, but holistic, I think has been an approach that I've adopted. And that was absolutely influenced by having worked with many clinicians during my time at Harbor Regional Center, being able to collaborate with other professionals and to see a person as the whole person they are.
Now, I have heard that ABA services can often be difficult to access. I've heard this from many different families in many different locations due to long waiting periods and or understaffing and so forth. So, what can families who are in need of these types of services, what can they do?
The wait lists are incredibly frustrating, right? Especially when families are already exhausted and they're looking for help now, not months down the line. I remember working with a family who was on a year-long wait list and they felt completely stuck. But instead of waiting without support, we focused on parent coaching and simple strategies at home, utilizing things like visual schedules, predictable routines, and communication tools, so that by the time their direct ABA services finally started, the child was more regulated and the parents themselves felt more confident, and they were then able to better advocate for the type of therapy and the goals that they wanted. So I do have three specific things that I encourage families to take on as they're waiting for services to start. The first one is to get on multiple wait lists with their funding source, right? That's likely going to be their insurance. And as they contact different agencies, making sure that they do get on a wait list. And another essential thing is to follow up with that agency at least on a monthly basis. There's been situations where I've heard families waiting 6 months or a year and they finally circle back to checking in with that agency and their name is nowhere to be found. Okay, so we don't want that to happen. The second thing is to explore parent training or coaching needs while they're waiting, if that's at all accessible or possible for them. The third option would be to do their best to utilize other supports that they might have available to them, whether that be school-based supports and services, speech therapy, occupational therapy, if they have access through that, through their insurance, if possible. And this can serve as a bridge. Now, these services don't necessarily replace ABA, but they can absolutely help to reduce the stress and support progress in the meantime when families are waiting.
All right, now, just out of curiosity, you provide services both in person and online, or is it one or the other?
BEHAVRIUM, we provide virtual services. So our focus is all online so that families can access our services in an easier manner and that they're able to log in wherever they may be. And we focus on parent training in regards to the ABA model that we provide and support families with.
So you are located in California, but you service families in other states as well, I'm assuming.
That's definitely a
Yeah.
possibility, being that we're virtual, right? Anyone can be able to access our live courses. We currently have 5 different courses that we offer that families can receive that level of parent training and coaching.
Okay, so now let's say that a parent receives, they've been on a waiting list and they receive that call that says, okay, your name is come up and we're ready to provide services for you. What questions should parents or caregivers ask when they are onboarding to a new ABA provider?
This is very important. Choosing an ABA provider can sometimes feel a little overwhelming, especially when caregivers have already had to navigate a system where they've been waiting for a long time. And so I want to propose a few questions that are not your typical questions as far as is staff available? Can you serve during, can you provide therapy during the time that meets our availability? I want to offer a few questions that as we're thinking about the whole person, as we're thinking about family dynamics, that these questions I think could be helpful in families selecting a provider. So the first one to consider is asking the agency, is your team trauma informed? We want to ask this, especially if an individual has experienced some form of trauma in their past, so that the services, the clinician, the team can be considerate of that person's past history. Another question to ask is, how do you define success? Because success is based on a person's cognitive and physical abilities can really vary greatly from person to person. And so we always want to ensure that services are individualized. And with that, and when we're thinking about the person who is going to be served in ABA therapy, another question is, how do you respect an individual's autonomy, their communication style, and perhaps sensory needs? I think that by asking this question, you're really speaking to the agency on how do they identify the individual. Another question to consider is, how are behaviors handled during distress or emotional dysregulation? Is the agency experienced to assist with that person's level or intensity of reported behaviors? I think this is important because in working with families, I've heard several times that certain agencies were not able to accept their child due to the intensity of the behaviors that were being displayed. Perhaps that includes self-injurious behaviors. So I think it's important to establish at the onset that this agency, this clinician, that this team is able to support that individual regardless of the intensity of the behaviors. Two other questions to consider are, what role does the caregiver and the individual themselves play in the treatment planning and ongoing goal setting for this person, for the family? When we're thinking about the whole person, I think this greatly can influence the service, what the goals are going to be, and everyone's involvement to support that learner. And the last question I want to offer is, how do you adjust goals as the individual grows or their needs change? In ABA programming, it's ever evolving, right? As the individual, as the learner grows, changes, as they learn in that moment, the ABA team should be able to adjust and grow with that child. So I think we want to ensure that the approach with the agency that the family is going to be working on can adopt a model that's personable and that really considers the learner and the family's needs.
I think those are some very good suggestions. Thank you for that, Kimberly. And now I want to touch on another side of the services that you offer. There's often misconception associated with providing sexual health education to children and adolescents. So, can you go into a bit of detail about what sexuality education actually includes? What does it look like?
This is my favorite question, Gilda. I'm so glad that you're asking it. And it's such an important place to start because a lot of people hear sexuality education and immediately think that it's only about sex. In reality, comprehensive sexuality education is about safety, health, relationships, self-understanding, and self-advocacy. It includes things like naming body parts accurately, understanding personal boundaries, consent, emotional regulation, hygiene, puberty, relationships, as well as how to recognize unsafe situations. And they should all be taught in an age-appropriate way. And I have a couple examples here to share of what that would look like based on different age groups. For early childhood, we want to take a very simple approach. We're talking about naming body parts correctly using medical terms, not special little nicknames. We want to ensure that your young child understands privacy. And this can be done during toilet training or bath time routines, right? As well as them learning that they can say yes or no to any particular type of touch that involves their own body. So even teaching consent throughout these moments, these natural routines, is important and can be easy if we are aware of it. Another area where consent can easily be discussed is asking for a hug before actually giving a hug, right? I think it's so easy with family members, with parents, that you see your child and you want to give them a hug. And I can understand, right, the affection and that desire to engage with them in that way. But are we teaching them autonomy? Are we teaching them consent? Are we teaching them that they can speak up for themselves if they're comfortable receiving something that we might consider so simple as a hug? Right? So I think when we're thinking about childhood, these are the things that we want to consider as far as sexual health education. And if you realize we didn't even know anything about what traditionally people might think is sexually related topics.
That makes a lot of sense. And these are all things that I would think any parent would want their child to be aware of. So, how would you advise that a parent or a caregiver begin the discussion with their children about sexuality? What would the introduction be? What would those first steps be?
I think when we're thinking of a little bit later, like elementary school years, that's where the conversation is now going to include perhaps more personal boundaries, right? And making sure that the child themselves is aware of what is a boundary in the first place. What does that look like to cross a boundary in another person? And as a fun way to teach a boundary, because when we think of boundaries, it's invisible, right? We don't walk around, right, in a circle around us. And so it can be really hard to visualize what does that look like? And so to make it fun to teach this, I've used hula hoop, right? And so while we're working on this, standing inside of that hula hoop, now you have a boundary, right? And depending on the size of the hula hoop, it might be about the distance of like your arm if you were to put your arm out. And if we are to walk around and do a circular motion inside of that hula hoop, it gives us that visualization of what our body boundary is. And then from there, we can begin to talk a little bit more about different ideas about what that looks like. If someone steps into your own boundary, is that welcomed or unwelcomed? Do you feel safe or not safe? And then being able to speak up about them. So that's just one example when we're looking at boundaries and how we could initiate a discussion, provide that visual aspect, and then create teaching opportunities just around that one concept.
All right, so that's very interesting. Now, how would you take this information that you just discussed and adapt it in a way that it is easier to digest for a neurodivergent learner? How would you do that? Because what you were explaining might be very good in a general sense, but then a neurodivergent
Mhm.
learner might need to receive it a little differently.
I agree. And this is, I think, where intentionality really matters, right? Neurodiverse learners often benefit from clear, concrete, and explicit instruction. That means avoiding vague language, using visuals, repetition, social narratives, role play, and real life examples. It also means respecting different communication styles, their sensory needs, and their ability to process information. So, for example, for young neurodiverse children, visuals and clear rules here can make abstract ideas like privacy and consent easier to understand. And then being consistent, right, with how we're modeling privacy, how we're modeling consent is going to be key. And really taking all of those everyday natural moments that happen with privacy and consent. This quickly reminds me of if we're teaching getting dressed, but your child steps out disrobed out of their bedroom and brings their clothes in the living room and they're trying to get dressed in the living room because they're trying to watch TV. Like we are practicing previously, let's redirect them back to their bedroom or the location where it's best for them to get dressed so that we can teach that certain tasks are completed in specific spaces in your house, right? So that would be one way to focus on that. Maybe with children that are a little bit older, elementary years, children could benefit from talking more about social expectations, things that certain kids, as we're mentioning, might pick up naturally. Children who are neurodivergent may not pick up on certain social cues or social expectations or social rules. Because as we're talking about certain things being invisible, social rules themselves are often invisible, right? We don't walk around in our communities and then with different announcements of different social expectations. Oftentimes, it's just these social rules are unspoken and it's just like a blanket statement that they should be known. But for some individuals, that's not the case. And so here, this is where we would adopt it with social stories, right? I think social stories can be really helpful in creating narratives to help an individual better understand different situations, different scenarios, and how to respond in that moment. So looking into those social stories can be very helpful, as well as modeling different social expectations, modeling social cues, and then putting all of that into practice as well with different role play scenarios. For teens, we want to become even more direct because now topics like dating, right, interest in others, consent, online interactions might be taking place. And so I think in these scenarios, we need to be very direct in regards to what is okay, what is not okay, what is safe, what is unsafe. And so here we might expand on social scripts. We might discuss different scenarios and what to do in scenario A versus scenario B, so that now we're talking about safety planning, and we can then increase the individual's confidence and their own self-advocacy, so that if they find themselves out in the world, perhaps as a teenager, as a young adult, without their caregiver or support staff, that when they're confronted with different scenarios, different situations in the moment, that they can feel more confident to make decisions for themselves.
I think that's all some pretty good advice. So at this point in the conversation, Kimberly, I want to ask, is there anything that I haven't asked you or anything that you would like to say to add to the conversation?
Now, I think I want to bring up full of common myths that sometimes come up with the topic of sexual health, since we're on this subject. I think I've often heard that perhaps neurodivergent individuals don't need this information. Some people worry that this information is inappropriate for young children, but what's truly inappropriate is leaving kids without the language or the skills to protect themselves. Did you know that people with developmental disabilities are 4 times more likely to experience sexual violence other than their neurotypical peers? That's a high rate, right? And so I think that knowing that statistic, it informs me that we do need to provide education to each person. And research and lived experience consistently shows that comprehensive, age-appropriate education increases safety and does not encourage risky behavior. So I think that's something for us to be aware of and to use those statistics with an actual solution, which is education.
I would think that any parent of a neurodivergent child would definitely want their child to be informed and safe and know what to do if a certain situation should present itself. Most definitely.
And another myth I'd like to share is that oftentimes caregivers feel perhaps sometimes intimidated, and they think that they should wait until their children ask questions related to their puberty or relationships or even identity or any other sexual health related topic. And the challenge is that many children, especially neurodivergent children, perhaps may not know what to ask. And so here, it's important to be proactive. And age-appropriate education ensures that they're not left guessing, or that children are not learning from unsafe sources.
Anything else? Any other myths that you would like to dispel? Because I think this is certainly good information for parents to have.
I think the last one that I think aligns with the myths that we're currently talking about is that neurodivergent individuals don't need information about sexual health, or that they won't understand it. And another common myth is that neurodivergent individuals don't need this information, or that they won't understand it. In reality, neurodivergent individuals are at a higher risk for different types of exploitation or abuse. And so we want to be aware of this so that we can make information accessible, so that we can adapt education for them. When sexual health education is adapted thoughtfully, neurodiverse learners can gain clarity, confidence, and safety. And so this is what we focus on in our sexual health courses at BEHAVRIUM, so that individuals ages 10 and above, they themselves can participate in group courses with other peers their age. And so we offer a variety of sexual health topics, And I won't go through the list of the different courses, but that information can be found at behavrium.com. That's BEHAVRIUM.com.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for your time and for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, Gilda, so much. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit upon the current need for behavioral and sexual health education for all people. Thank you for your time.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast. You can find it on Apple iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify, and other popular platforms. We'd appreciate you taking the time to leave us a review. You can also listen to the podcast on YouTube at ARP Social, where you'll find bonus content, and be sure to follow us on Facebook or Instagram to get up-to-date notifications about the latest news and episodes. If you would like more information on anything else we've covered on the Autism Resource Podcast, visit us online at autismresourceproject.org/podcast. Be sure to check out our growing website often, since we are continually adding useful information and resources. I want to thank our listeners for spending part of their day with us. This is the Autism Resource Podcast, and I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.